Welcome to Animal Attacks. Today, I'll go through moments where hunters face dangerous animals. From a flooded wetland at night, where a man stepped into knee-deep water, chasing the perfect shot as a constrictor closed in, to a bait site where a single misstep brought movement out of the grass from every direction at once. Let's start with a mother and a daughter trying to finish a long-planned trip. It was May 12, 2026. On the northeastern side of Kodiak Island, Alaska, a spring hunt deep inland near a floatplane inlet turned into a fatal bear encounter as dense brush and lingering snow patches compressed sound and visibility into a tight, silent corridor. Melva Sarin, 53, worked night shifts at a packaging warehouse in rural eastern Oregon while raising 3 children after an early divorce. Hunting had become both a long-term personal goal and a practical source of food, delayed by work demands and progressively worsening joint pain that limited her mobility. She had spent years planning an Alaska hunt that she and her daughter Talia would complete together. Talia Sarin, 29, worked as a home care aide in a small retirement facility and had been hunting alongside her mother for several years. The Alaska trip was one of the biggest hunts they had ever planned together and represented a shared milestone before her mother's physical condition declined further. They traveled with a small outfitter operating a basic canvas camp in remote inland terrain. It sounds less like a hunting trip and more like time they wanted to spend together. Brown bears on Kodiak Island are among the largest coastal grizzlies, with males often exceeding 800 to 1,000 pounds and capable of short bursts of high speed. Their sense of smell is highly developed and can detect carrion from long distances under favorable wind conditions. By late spring, they often move inland to feed on winter-killed animals and other food sources exposed by melting snow, increasing the likelihood of close encounters. Earlier that day, a wildlife advisory had warned there was more bear activity in the inland drainages because of the thaw. The guide told everyone to stick close and keep each other in sight, but the 2 women ended up drifting a bit behind while following deer tracks through thick salmonberry and fallen timber. Talia detected a strong carrion odor in the brush. The guide slowed the group and prepared bear spray. Moments later, movement ahead stopped, followed by breaking branches and a sudden lack of ambient forest noise. That smell would have gotten my attention immediately. The bear emerged from the alder thicket at close range, under 20 feet, moving low and fast with almost no warning. The guide immediately fired at the charging animal, but the shot failed to stop its momentum as it closed the remaining distance. Talia deployed bear spray, but the wind carried much of it off target, reducing its effect before the bear reached them. The impact threw Melva backward into snow and buried timber, causing severe, blunt trauma to the torso and head region that left her disoriented and unable to stand or effectively orient herself. The bear pinned her upper body and bit into her shoulder and neck, shaking violently and tearing through clothing and gear. The guide hesitated briefly under the rapidly evolving threat as Talia moved into his line of fire. Talia moved toward her mother and briefly made contact with her clothing in an attempt to pull her clear. The bear released Melva and immediately redirected toward Talia at close range, knocking her to the ground. She sustained a severe bite to the lower back and was dragged through brush as she called for help. The guide fired again and hit the bear, but it still didn't break off. It stayed on top of Talia and caused severe neck injuries. And after that, she lost movement very quickly. The guide used a satellite phone to request emergency assistance and transmitted coordinates. Due to fog, terrain, and limited inland access routes, evacuation was delayed, and responders arrived approximately 2 hours later via coordinated boat and overland transport. Talia was declared deceased at the scene, with no viable opportunity for immediate medical intervention. Wildlife officers later located and euthanized the bear approximately half a mile from the site near a suspected carcass area in dense brush. Preliminary assessments suggested defensive behavior, likely associated with a nearby food source during spring scavenging conditions, though full investigation findings would depend on further analysis. The outfitter temporarily suspended operations pending review before later resuming limited spring hunts under state regulations. The incident received brief attention within regional hunting communities. Family members arranged transport and burial in Oregon following official release of remains. I never realized how fast visibility and terrain could erase every safe option during an animal encounter. Up next, we move to a python hunt that ended in a fatal situation. It was July 18, 2016, in a remote mangrove wetland system along the eastern coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, near a network of tidal channels and flooded lowland forest. A night filming trip took place in flooded terrain of shallow swamp water, dense reeds, and mangrove edges where visibility was heavily reduced by darkness and vegetation cover. Darrow Vane, 31, worked irregular roofing jobs and spent much of his free time filming wildlife encounters online, increasingly focusing on invasive species content. He often joined informal night outings with minimal preparation, prioritizing close-range footage over safety considerations. The wetland trip was arranged with a single companion, acting as both guide and camera operator, entering by small motorized boat into a flooded corridor of dense reeds and submerged roots after heavy rain, left knee-deep water, floating debris, and reduced visibility across the marsh. Local advisories noted elevated nighttime risk in flooded zones due to unstable terrain, submerged root networks, and soft sediment layers capable of sudden foot suction.
Even knee-deep water out, there isn't really just water anymore. It's uneven ground you can't properly see.
Reticulated pythons in the region can exceed 15 feet and are capable of constriction, but encounters with adults are usually brief and situational. In shallow flooded terrain, the main risk is typically sudden contact and defensive biting, with any disruption to balance more likely caused by the terrain itself than by sustained physical interaction with the animal. Darrow and his companion were moving through the half-submerged channel, scanning the reeds with headlamps and a handheld light. They spot something still near the waterline, up ahead, kind of hidden in the plants and floating debris. Darrow leans in for a closer look and steps off the firmer ground into soft, unstable mud, even though his companion doesn't really feel good about the situation and hangs back a bit. The python struck from the reeds and bit onto Darrow's forearm. Startled, he lost balance and fell into the flooded channel, where soft mud and submerged roots trapped his legs. The snake briefly attempted to coil before disengaging as the struggle intensified. Alone in the darkness, Darrow became increasingly exhausted and disoriented as repeated attempts to free himself failed. The combination of unstable ground, limited visibility, submerged root entrapment, and repeated loss of footing led to prolonged immersion, with repeated submersion episodes resulting in progressive water aspiration and eventual airway compromise, consistent with drowning physiology. By the time responders reached the flooded interior, Darrow had already died, and resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful due to prolonged submersion. Recovered camera footage contained fragmented audio and unstable visuals, splashes, movement through reeds, and brief bursts of shouting before the recording became distorted and stopped abruptly.
The audio doesn't really give clarity, just fragments that don't quite connect into a full picture.
Emergency services were contacted via satellite device and reached the nearest access point later that night before entering the flooded interior by a small motorized boat. By the time responders arrived, Darrow had already died, with resuscitation efforts unsuccessful due to prolonged submersion and delayed extraction. A medical examination listed the cause of death as drowning in flooded terrain, with contributing factors including physical entanglement, unstable footing, and prolonged immersion during the struggle in submerged conditions. Wildlife authorities later reviewed the incident as part of ongoing safety concerns in nighttime invasive species tracking zones. The case received limited regional coverage, and Darrow's companion later withdrew from public activity following the incident review.
I thought shallow water was the worst part until the rescue itself became impossible.
Following that case, we shift to a lion incident where a bait site drew multiple members of a pride. It was September 12, 2014, in a regulated hunting concession within a game management area bordering the Serengeti ecosystem in northern Tanzania, outside protected national park boundaries, where licensed trophy hunting was permitted under strict quota-based wildlife management regulations. Nevan Rusk, 44, was a diesel mechanic from Wyoming with prior experience hunting mountain lions and wolves in North America. He had traveled to Africa on a licensed safari hunt, operating in terrain and conditions that differed significantly from his prior experience, particularly in nocturnal predator behavior and limited nighttime visibility. The outfitter was operating under concession permits using basic vehicles and fixed lighting. A baited carcass had been placed under authorization to attract nocturnal predators for controlled observation and legal harvest under quota regulations. In this environment, lions are ambush predators that rely on short bursts of acceleration through tall grass and uneven terrain to close distance before detection. At night, dense vegetation and low visibility significantly reduce reaction time once an approach begins.
I kept thinking how little warning there really would be if something came through that grass line.
Nevin moved away from the vehicle despite instructions to remain within headlight coverage, carrying a rifle and camera as he approached the edge of the illuminated grass line. His companion remained near the vehicle, maintaining headlights directed toward the bait site, leaving surrounding vegetation in partial darkness. A lion emerged from tall grass cover and initiated a short-distance charge, closing rapidly across uneven terrain before visual detection was possible. Contact occurred at close range, knocking Nevin to the ground. He attempted to raise his rifle, which discharged during the struggle without a clearly identified target. The lion delivered a single forceful bite to the lower leg, producing severe crush laceration trauma with likely involvement of major vascular structures in the popliteal region. The animal then withdrew into nearby vegetation and remained outside the illuminated area.
Nevin attempted to return toward the vehicle but showed rapid signs of severe blood loss,
including loss of coordination and reduced strength as hemorrhage continued. In major lower limb arterial injuries, deterioration can occur quickly, though survival time may vary depending on the extent of vessel damage and any natural compression or clotting. He collapsed a short distance from the initial contact point before reaching the vehicle or receiving direct assistance. From the vehicle, warning shots were fired and headlights were used to scan the surrounding grassland, but dense vegetation and uneven terrain significantly limited visibility and delayed immediate location of the injured individual.
It felt like the light was searching, but the ground itself was working against it.
Evacuation personnel from the concession were contacted and arrived approximately 50 minutes later via access tracks under low light conditions. Stabilization attempts were unsuccessful, and death was pronounced at the scene. The cause of death was recorded as hemorrhagic shock, resulting from severe lower limb vascular injury sustained during a close-range lion attack in a regulated wildlife management area. Investigators later classified the incident as a brief predatory encounter during a permitted concession operation, consistent with a single close-range attack followed by disengagement after inflicting disabling injury. The case was later referenced in safari circles as an example of how quickly a single arterial injury in remote night conditions can become fatal when evacuation is delayed and visibility is limited.
Out there, once you lose the light, everything else just feels like guessing.
Darkness outside the headlights became deadlier than the animal itself. From Tanzania, we moved to a volcanic hillside where a wounded dragon triggered a close-range wildlife encounter near a carcass site. It was August 17, 2017, on a sparsely populated island near Komodo National Park in Indonesia. A livestock retrieval operation moved into steep volcanic hillside terrain of loose soil, dry brush, and scattered grass above grazing land where livestock losses had recently been reported. Barelonu, 38, was a coastal livestock farmer from a nearby village where goats and pigs were a primary income source. He had no formal wildlife training, but had experience defending livestock using a bolt-action rifle and machete. He had become increasingly concerned after repeated livestock losses near hillside grazing areas. Weeks earlier, several goats had been taken near dry slopes where carcasses were later found partially consumed in brush, despite repeated warnings from local officials to avoid attracting Komodo dragons and to wait for relocation teams. Delays in response led villagers, including Bare and two younger relatives, to move on foot during a morning ascent toward the last known kill site.
It feels like one of those situations where waiting longer wasn't really an option for them anymore.
Komodo dragons can exceed 150 to 250 pounds and move in short bursts over uneven volcanic terrain. Their bites cause deep traumatic wounds and substantial tissue damage. Biological compounds associated with the bite may contribute to prolonged bleeding, but the primary danger comes from severe physical injury and blood loss. By late morning, the group reached a higher section of the slope where the ground was loose and unstable, with sparse brush and exposed volcanic soil. Below them, near a partially consumed carcass under light shade, a Komodo dragon remained near the remains, shifting intermittently. Barret descended toward the lower slope where the carcass was located, closing distance with the Komodo dragon that remained nearby on unstable volcanic ground. At close range, the Komodo delivered a defensive bite to his lower leg, causing deep lacerations and immediate bleeding. As he attempted to retreat uphill, the loose volcanic soil collapsed beneath his footing. He lost balance and tumbled down the incline, striking exposed rock outcrops and hardened volcanic surfaces before coming to rest farther below.
The combined effect of the fall and blood loss left him unable to regain his footing or climb back toward the ridge.
The Komodo dragon remained near the carcass following the encounter. While Komodo dragons can follow scent trails over short distances, they typically rely on ambush and opportunistic feeding rather than sustained pursuit, especially across broken or steep terrain. It did not follow the downhill movement and instead stayed at the feeding site, intermittently repositioning around the carcass where the strongest scent source remained. From higher ground, his relatives tried to intervene, but the slope was too steep and they were too far to really do much. The vegetation kept blocking their view, and at times they couldn't clearly see what was happening below. They moved along the ridge, trying to get a better angle, but it was inconsistent and hard to stay in a position where they could actually be effective. Over time, Barret's condition worsened due to blood loss from the bite and multiple blunt force injuries sustained during the fall. Impacts against exposed rock and hard volcanic ground left him unable to move or stabilize on the slope. Signs of traumatic shock became more pronounced as he deteriorated while rescue efforts were organized. Emergency services were contacted by mobile phone from the ridge area. A response team arrived by boat approximately 70 minutes later at the nearest accessible landing point. From there, additional time was required to assess terrain safety and potential Komodo presence before any inland movement or extraction attempt could begin. Subsequent assessment attributed the fatality primarily to traumatic injuries from the fall, with blood loss from the bite identified as a contributing factor. Local authorities later restricted access to the hillside due to continued Komodo activity in the region and repeated livestock losses near surrounding grazing areas. The incident remained largely regional in coverage, and villagers avoided the area afterward, citing continued dragon presence and increased caution around surrounding grazing land and hillside routes.
You get the sense the place itself stayed quiet after that. Not officially closed, just avoided.
The unstable slope was the biggest danger until the wounded animal turned back uphill. Up next, we enter the forests, where a bear recovery hunt collapsed inside a steep ravine. It was October 14, 2015, in the forested mountains outside Harghita County, Romania, when a bear drive hunt collapsed after a wounded brown bear broke through the drive line and moved unpredictably through the terrain, intersecting with a hunter's position at close range. Sorin Valia, 47, was a self-employed heating technician from a small town near Brasov who hunted boar and deer for most of his life. He was known among co-workers for competitiveness and impatience during group hunts, often treating shared radio coordination as secondary to tracking success. He had recently joined a private hunting association after co-workers introduced him to organized bear hunts, seeing it as a step up from smaller game. Friends said he became increasingly focused on proving himself in larger hunts across Eastern Europe, especially when competition between teams was involved. The forest was dense, fir, and beech, with narrow logging tracks cutting across unstable slopes where visibility dropped to only a few yards. Brown bears in this region can exceed 500 pounds, sprint short distances over 30 miles per hour, and may follow wounded animals over distance, and, if encounters occur at close range, can rapidly escalate into defensive or predatory attacks.
Even in daylight, that kind of tree cover makes distance feels misleading.
Earlier that morning, a separate hunting party had wounded a large bear several miles away during a drive hunt, and radio channels carried repeated warnings to avoid tracking the animal until trained handlers arrived. Despite this, Sorin left his assigned position after noticing a blood trail along a steep ridge line. Light rain started coming down as he kept moving along the ridge alone, making the ground softer and way more slippery on that steep slope. Other hunters later said they either couldn't get his radio or it was turned down, and with fresh blood on the leaves and everything disturbed, it looked like the wounded bear was heading downhill into thicker cover. The bear emerged from dense brush at less than 15 feet, striking Sorin as he raised his rifle too late. The impact knocked him off balance and caused him to fall and slide down the slope through wet leaves and broken branches. Witnesses downslope heard repeated crashing and shouting as he fell roughly 40 feet into a narrow ravine, likely sustaining significant blunt force trauma and possible fractures. The wounded bear moved down the slope with him into the ravine, remaining in close proximity through dense cover and uneven terrain.
That ravine setting sounds like somewhere you lose control of a momentum fast.
On the ground, near exposed rocks, Soren attempted to fire again but either missed or jammed his rifle while trying to reposition. The bear got to him within seconds and immediately went into a close-range attack, biting into his chest and stomach while pushing him back against the ravine wall. Other hunters fired warning shots from above but could not safely descend. The bear continued the attack as Soren lost consciousness, maintaining close-range contact until additional stimuli caused a brief withdrawal. Rescue teams arrived approximately 70 minutes later via forest roads and carried out a ground extraction after wildlife officers secured the area. A coroner report listed the cause of death as massive blood loss, chest trauma, and organ failure consistent with repeated bear bites and blunt force injuries. The incident was widely discussed among Romanian hunting groups due to earlier radio warnings that had gone unheeded. Officials initiated a procedural review of the incident and issued updated safety recommendations for drive hunts in the region. Tracking teams were deployed to locate the wounded bear, which was later euthanized after being confirmed as involved in the attack. Outside regional coverage, the case faded quickly, though within hunting circles, it remained a reference point for communication failures during coordinated drive hunts in dense forest terrain. Subsequent investigation reviewed radio logs, terrain mapping, and blood trail patterns leading into the ravine. Officers concluded the bear had been injured earlier and responded aggressively during close-range contact after being pursued into steep, confined terrain with limited escape routes. Analysts noted that dense fir cover and the slope eliminated safe engagement distance, while communication delays hindered coordinated tracking response. The site was later designated a high-risk area for wounded animal recovery during similar drive hunts. A formal report listed the cause of death as massive trauma and hemorrhagic shock, consistent with repeated bear bites and blunt force injuries.
I never realized how quickly a wounded animal can retake control of an encounter.
Following Romania, we shift to Oahu, where a shark fisherman stepped into active surf for close-range footage. It was June 9, 2018, near a rocky shoreline on Oahu, Hawaii. A night of shoreline shark fishing escalated when a hooked tiger shark was drawn into ankle-deep surf and a man stepped into the water to film as the animal remained active in the surge zone.
The rocks there don't really look dangerous until you see how fast the waves run through them.
Keone Varek, 34, worked as a warehouse forklift operator handling overnight freight loads in Kapolei. He spent most weekends shoreline fishing and increasingly prioritized close-range footage over safety while filming. He was not part of any professional filming group, but had begun posting edited clips of fishing encounters online, hoping to attract sponsorships from tackle brands. Friends described him as persistent and increasingly focused on getting close-range footage rather than safe catches. Over the past year, he shifted toward shark fishing content after seeing similar videos gain attention online. He believed proximity footage would improve his reach, even if it meant entering shallow water during active retrievals. The trip that night was informal, arranged among friends without professional safety gear or dive support, relying instead on heavy short tackle and handheld lighting. The shoreline was a mix of black volcanic rock shelves, broken coral fragments, and shallow surge channels where waves repeatedly pushed water over submerged ledges.
Standing there, you can feel how uneven everything is under the water, even when it looks calm.
Tiger sharks in Hawaiian waters commonly exceed 10 feet and can accelerate suddenly when stimulated by prey cues or turbulent surf conditions. A few fishermen actually warned him not to go into the water while the shark was still active in the shallow surge zone, noting that hooked sharks in surf conditions can roll or surge unpredictably when the line is under tension. The tide was also rising, pushing water repeatedly over the submerged rock shelves. Even so, Keone entered the water with pliers, while the others remained onshore filming. At first, the shark appeared fatigued, rolling in the surge, as the fishing line stayed tight and the surf repeatedly lifted and dropped it against the shallow reef structure. Keone edged closer toward the leader line as people called out from shore. As a wave cycle pushed the shark sideways across the rocks, its body twisted sharply under line tension and breaking surf energy. In the resulting turbulence, it made accidental contact with Keone's left arm as he leaned in, knocking him off balance into the surge. A second brief contact occurred moments later as both the shark and Keone were displaced by the same wave set, pushing him back toward the rocks during the chaotic movement of water, line tension, and submerged terrain.
That stretch of rock shelf leaves almost nowhere stable to step once you're in the wash.
Franz tried pulling on his fishing harness while the shark was still close by, moving unpredictably just a few yards away in the rough surf. Someone immediately called emergency services, and responders arrived about 24 minutes later via a nearby coastal road. The coroner report listed catastrophic blood loss from severe upper limb vascular and soft tissue trauma consistent with a large shark bite. He was unconscious during transport and later pronounced dead at the hospital. The incident circulated among local fishing groups after cell phone footage showed the shoreline response and the sudden retreat from the water. Experienced anglers later cited repeated mistakes, including entering surf water with an active large shark still uncontained and prioritizing filming over clearing the line zone. After that, the fishing group just stopped going to that shoreline for a while and switched to deeper offshore trips where everything was handled from boats instead of the rocks. People living near the access point later said people just kind of stayed away from those lava rocks for a while. And most anglers actually moved over to offshore fishing instead of messing around in that shoreline stretch. Local authorities later reiterated that shoreline shark handling in shallow surf creates unpredictable risk when animals are still mobile and unrestrained. Investigators noted that the combination of rising tide, submerged rock shelves, and proximity filming reduced reaction time to seconds rather than minutes. Keone's friends reportedly stopped posting fishing content for a period after reviewing the footage privately.
The shoreline remained open, but was informally avoided by, many anglers who preferred offshore boat-based shark releases after the incident, in the years that followed.